Hi, my name is John Breslin from Menlo Galway. I was invited to speak at the Stanford University course on European Entrepreneurship and Innovation Thought Leader series by Bulletin. And I'm on the campus of Stanford University here, just in front of the Hewlett and Packard electrical engineering buildings. I was going to talk a little bit about professor entrepreneurs, basically academics who've been involved in startups and commercial endeavours. But also to provide some context, I was going to talk about Ireland, where it is in terms of technology, education, and also I suppose to show how a small country can actually make a big difference to the world. So when I was originally coming up with the topics for this talk, there was a lot of stuff I wanted to talk about, not just in terms of what I was at, but also in terms of the country of Ireland as a whole, from innovation and various initiatives to the ICT sector and the Irish diaspora. So I'm going to touch on some of these topics, and hopefully in the comments for this video we can discuss some of the others. So Stanford is a fantastic campus, and I'm giving you kind of a 360-degree view of just where I'm seated at the moment. There's actually quite a lot of connections between the Bay Area and between Galway, where I'm based, and I was going to tell you a little bit about those. So actually this morning I visited Menlo Park, and Menlo Park is right beside Stanford here. What you may not know is that Menlo was actually named by two people from Galway. So on the right hand side here you can see a picture of Galway City and the university where I'm based, NUI Galway. The little star there is where my my office is, the engineering building, which is a fantastic new building built, just completed in the past 2 years. And actually directly across the river from where I am, you can see Menlo. Menlo is the place where two guys came from Galway, and they bought a farm which they then proceeded to name Menlo Park. So Menlo actually is the it's the Irish word for small lake, and it refers to a lake just across the river here, which you can see. Another connection between Galway and the Bay Area is this man here. His name is Michael OShaughnessy. OShaughnessy graduated from NUI Galway, from my university, in 1884. And he was the San Francisco city engineer for 20 years, from 1912 to 1932. And he's responsible for having commissioned a wide range of engineering projects in the Bay Area, notably the Golden Gate Bridge, which he is also credited with naming in 1917. But he's also been responsible for the completion of the tramway system in San Francisco, and the biggest project was probably the HE power and water supply, which supplies electricity and water to much of San Francisco, San Mateo and surrounding areas. Various things named after him. Actually, we had a bridge which was just completed last year, which is named after OShaughnessy, basically a suspension bridge which is connecting one part of the campus to another part. So a little bit about myself. I'm an academic or an educator at NUI Galway, where I teach electronic engineering subjects, fundamentals for first years, and then more advanced topics. But also I've taught a range of subjects, including web media. And in fact, a lot of the engineering work I suppose I do now is in terms of systems for the web, working on something called the social semantic web, which I'll talk about later on in various application areas, but my background in electronics and in magnetics and transformer design. And then as an entrepreneur, I've been involved in various companies, including boards.ie, Streamglider, and some stuff I'll talk about in a while. My kind of interest in technology, I suppose, came from when I was a teenager, reading books about science and technology, and I suppose future look books where they would kind of talk about emerging technologies and what was coming down the road. But I used to listen to a lot of shortwave radio, and shortwave radio I suppose you can think of almost being like the internet before the internet, because if you wanted to kind of get news from around the world, well, obviously there were radio stations and newspapers in your locality, but getting stuff directly involved listening to shortwave radio, where you could tune into a radio station live from Moscow or America or Poland or Australia through various relays, and hear a view of what was going on in that country right now and then. And hearing a local voice is a big difference compared to hearing something that's being filtered through your national media. There was a hobby in shortwave radio which basically involved collecting confirmation reports from various radio stations. And what you would do is you would send in a kind of a report on how you heard a radio station. It was called a SINPO report, and it stood for signal, interference, noise, propagation, and overall. So you basically give scores to different qualities of a radio reception, and then you would give some details of the show you were listening to. And then the radio station would confirm what you had heard and send you on what was called a QSL card, which was basically, I've heard you, or a verification that you had indeed heard that station. And later on I used to enjoy actually sending in little tapes of myself in my teenage voice to these stations, and there was a real thrill when you would hear back those radio shows played back to you all over the airwaves. So when I started in college, I chose to do electronic engineering after getting some advice from my career guidance teachers. And at that time, we hadn't really had much exposures to computers. So maybe when I was in high school, as we call it, secondary school, I think I remember we spent maybe 1 hour with a computer. We had an Apple Lisa, and I remember we did some basic programming and maybe played Pong for a little while. But it was really until I got to college that I managed to lay hands on the computer. At that time, we used to use the mainframe, a digital VAX mainframe. And Digital Equipment Corporation had a big facility in Galway where they employed about 1,000 people at one stage. And they donated various pieces of equipment to the university. So one of these was the mainframe. And if you logged into the mainframe, you could see people logged in. You could also tell that there was a terminal that they were logged into. And pretty quickly I realized that you could actually draw a map of these terminals. This picture here shows a kind of a plan view looking down on a set of terminals in one particular computer room. And each of the terminals had a fixed identifier, which you can see here represented by some sequence of letters and numbers, something like TTA2 or whatever. And I realized you could actually just draw a map of where people were seated, where the people were seated, what terminals they were logged into. And indeed you could see patterns. If you were outside of the room, you could probably figure out that two friends were sitting beside each other and so on. So because a lot of my research is in the area of social software, I retrospectively claim that this is my first attempt at writing social software, and this is written in what was called DCL, Digital Command Language, on VMS. But the thing that really kind of caught my attention was a program called Bulletin that somebody had made, I believe originated out of MIT. And Bulletin was basically a discussion forum service. So you could log into this bulletin board and you could see various discussion areas. They call them folders. And you could select a folder then, you could think of it like a discussion forum, and then you could read the messages in there. And I thought that this was brilliant because we had various communication methods on the mainframe. We had email, where you could email one or many. We had a phone service called VMS Phone, where basically you could do text chat with somebody, similar to how you would do a Skype chat today. But the bulletin board service, I just thought this was amazing because you could see kind of communities of interest forming around various topics on the forum area. And then you could join that community and you could express your interests in certain topics there and chat with them on those topics. So when the web came around, and the web was actually being established just around that time, but it wasn't really in the mainstream, I suppose, for another 5 to 10 years, I set up an online discussion forum to talk about computer games. So I was a postgrad student. I used to play a lot of computer games, and we had an online discussion area where we could talk about those games. And it was a fairly basic system, as you can see, a kind of a recreation of it here, but you posted a message and then people could reply to those messages. Pretty quickly it got very busy, and I had to figure out a way to actually archive the messages, to have pages of messages, to kind of put them into groupings by date as it got busier and busier. And then after a while, the computer gamers who were there just didn't want to talk about games anymore. They wanted to talk about other things like television or Linux computing, or what they were doing in their free time, maybe after hours activities. So we eventually had to add more and more areas for those people to talk about other topics. And it grew from 5 forums to 20 discussion forums. And after a year or two, some of my fellow gamers said, we should really set up a kind of more general website where people can talk about any topics of interest from an Irish perspective. And we looked into getting the domain name boards.ie, and there's a whole other story there about how my friends managed to do that. But basically myself and a couple of gaming friends set up a company called boards.ie Limited. which became a kind of a general, I suppose, discussion area for Irish activities. So today there's about 1,000 forums on boards talking about all kinds of topics, ranging from, as you can see here, arts and theatre and mustard and Joss Whedon and politics and soccer and skeptics and whatever you like. There's a kind of topic there for a whole range of topics. Quite a, I suppose, an information resource for the Irish population. There's over 2 million people visit the site each month, and our estimates are about a third to 40% of the Irish population actually happens across boards.ie, either knowingly or unknowingly, when they're looking for information. You know you've reached new heights when you appear on a cartoon from XKCD, a little excerpt shown here on the bottom right, which is from their map of online communities, which basically represents in an abstract way the various communities on the web and how big they are. And this picture here is from the forums subpart of this online map. It's been interesting to see all the things that have kind of spun out of this community, like any kind of reflection of the physical world. We've had people getting married, people having children, soccer teams, drama groups being formed from interactions on this site. Indeed, there's also been a spin-off company, which is in the classifieds ad space, where basically we had a discussion forum that grew and grew and grew, and eventually we spun off a separate site, which indeed, or in turn, became a separate company called adverts.ie, Adverts Marketplace. So after my time as a postgrad student, I started lecturing, and I was a contract lecturer at NUI Galway, where I was teaching electronics. NUI Galway, just a little bit of background, it was established in 1845 by the Queen of the United Kingdom, and it was one of 4 universities that became part of the National University of Ireland later on. Some other facts about the university, I suppose notable people who were affiliated with the university, George Johnson Stoney, who is the person who termed the electron, or gave the name to the electron and came up with the first approximate value of its charge, was a professor in the university. And we've just seen the Hobbit movie coming out, and every time one of the Hobbit or Lord of the Rings films comes out, it emerges online that Tolkien was an external examiner in the university. And also, I think an interesting point is about Alice Perry, who is credited as being the first female engineering graduate in the world, graduated from NUI Galway in 1906 in its previous name. So I taught electronic engineering for 4 years, and then my contract came to an end. And around that time, a new research institute was being established at Galway called Derry. And I'll talk later on about how these institutes were established, but basically this was founded from a greenfield site in 2003. And I inquired about being a researcher at Derry, and I kind of imagined, because my background was electronics, that I might be doing some kind of web meets electronics work. The main research area that Derry does is in the area of semantic web. And semantic web is basically endeavouring to add more meaning, more structure to the web to make it easier for computers to process and help us in our everyday tasks. And I thought maybe the meaning part and electronics could be linked together, in terms of you have some electronic devices and you're trying to get them to talk to each other, or maybe you're trying to talk to a bunch of devices through some kind of common understanding of how they operate, or what the various terms are. For example, to describe volume, you might have audio level on one machine and volume on another machine, and maybe you want to control them all simultaneously through a common description. But actually, when I joined Derry, I had a chat with now director Stefan Decader about the emerging area of social networks. And social networks were really just emerging online in 2004. The likes of Friendster and Orkut were quite popular. Facebook was still in the background. LinkedIn was being established. And the area of social networks seemed to kind of tie strongly to my own interests in online communities. And indeed, I kind of hopped from a kind of a hobby of online communities to actually being my job in terms of studying online communities and how to connect them using semantic web technologies. And indeed, that's something that I started working on in 2004 and still involved with today, is a project called Shock, which is basically a framework to interlink online community sites. And You can think of it as being a common set of terms to describe the things in social websites and online communities. Shown up here in the top right are a set of terms in red. Things like forums and discussion posts and user accounts. They all crop up across various types of social websites, and indeed different applications for what you could do with this. It could be aggregation across a range of heterogeneous social websites, maybe marking up the data on social websites for search engines, and so on. At the moment, there's shock data being produced from tens of thousands of domains. Quite a lot of government websites are powered by a system called Drupal, which is a content management system on the web. About a quarter of .gov sites are powered by this system as opposed to others. And indeed, if you look at the energy.gov website or one of these sites and you view the page source, you'll see some metadata, or basically social items within that site, marked up using the shock and other semantic vocabularies. And then more recently, I was involved in a startup, which is actually a US startup called Streamglider, which two contacts. One is called Nova Spivak, who is a tech entrepreneur based in California, and the other is Bill McDaniel, who is a tech entrepreneur based in Texas. And together we came up with Streamglider, which is basically a dashboard for browsing content on the iPad. And it's a real-time newsreader in that content is coming into your newsreader and streaming by in real time. So streams of content flow across the screen, and you can compose those streams from different sources or different feeds and view them then in different modes. You can have a grid view mode, a slideshow mode, and a magazine type mode. Our approach to this is to make this available as a white labeled or private labeled platform where a publisher can take the Streamglider system and they can define the streams of content that go in there for distribution then to their customers. It's received investment from Irish Technology Capital. Some of the people involved in that are John Hartnett, who is based in Silicon Valley, John Ryan, who is who created Macrovision, the encryption technology used in most video systems, and Barry O'Sullivan, who is Senior Vice President at Cisco.